What if love wasn't enough? What if the very thing meant to heal becomes the wound? Let that sit with you for a moment, because for all the hearts out there carrying invisible bruises, there's something deeply familiar, even painfully so, about Johnny Depp's story. Most of us didn't just watch him on the screen. We grew up with him. From the moment he stumbled drunkenly into our lives as Captain Jack Sparrow, or stared at the world through the gentle, wounded eyes of Edward Scissorhands, Johnny wasn't just an actor. He was a mirror, reflecting the misunderstood, the broken, the beautiful oddness we all carry inside. We didn't just watch his movies. We felt them. There was always something about Johnny that made you look twice, not just because of the characters he played, but because of what he brought to them. It wasn't just performance, it was presence. A kind of vulnerability that most actors try to avoid, but he wore like a second skin. In a world that often celebrates polish and perfection, Johnny brought the raw, the messy, the imperfect, and somehow, he made it beautiful. You could see it in his eyes, that flicker of sadness even when he smiled. That feeling that behind every costume, every accent, every strange and wonderful role, there was a man quietly asking the same questions we all ask. Am I enough? Will I ever be understood? Maybe that's why we connected to him so deeply. He made us feel seen, not in spite of our flaws, but because of them. You think about Edward Scissorhands, a character who couldn't touch without hurting, who wanted nothing more than to love and be loved, but who was kept at a distance by the very things that made him unique. That role wasn't just cinema. It was a reflection of the emotional distance so many of us feel in our own lives. How many people live behind invisible walls, too scared to reach out, fearing they'll do damage simply by being themselves? Or think about Captain Jack Sparrow, a role that could have easily been cartoonish in someone else's hands, but Johnny turned him into something mythic. Not because he was heroic, but because he was human, flawed, drunken, slightly chaotic. But also sharp, loyal, and oddly full of heart. You never quite knew if Jack was brave or just reckless. And isn't that the tightrope we all walk sometimes? Trying to navigate life when we don't have a map, when we're faking confidence just to survive the storm? Johnny Depp gave us characters who weren't just quirky, they were cracked open. He gave voice to the strange, the soft, the offbeat souls who never fit into neat boxes. People like you, like me, the quiet kids, the artists, the ones who never really felt like they belonged anywhere. And in doing so, he created a kind of home, not just on screen, but in our hearts. But that kind of empathy doesn't come from nowhere. You don't get that kind of depth unless you've lived through something, unless you've been wounded in a way that never quite heals. And maybe that's the most haunting part about loving someone like Johnny from afar, knowing that the pain he plays so well might not be acting at all. There were always rumors, whispers, that behind the fame and the fanfare there was a man quietly battling demons, that underneath the eyeliner and laughter there was grief, a history, a softness hardened by time. Because what people forget is that Johnny never wanted to be a star in the traditional sense. He wanted to be a musician, a storyteller, a soul, in motion. He stumbled into acting, and even when he became a household name, he resisted the machine. He avoided blockbuster roles. He sought out the strange, the poetic, the roles nobody else dared to play. Because that's who he was, and still is. And yet, for all his resistance, the world still tried to define him, to package him, to label him. First as a teen idol, then as Hollywood's most eccentric leading man, and later as the tragic tabloid figure at the center of controversy. But none of those labels tell the whole story, because the truth is Johnny Depp was never any of those things. He was, and remains, something more complex, more human. He's the quiet person in the corner of the room who's sketching instead of speaking. He's the friend who never says much about his problems, but will sit with you all night when you're going through yours. He's the man who writes poetry on napkins, who listens more than he talks, who carries 1,000 stories in his silence. And maybe that's why so many people, especially the broken, the misunderstood, the ones who've loved and lost and loved again, feel so fiercely protective of him. Because in some strange way, loving Johnny Depp feels like loving the most hidden parts of ourselves. The parts we rarely show. The parts we hope someone will one day understand. He didn't just act. He made us believe that it was okay to be different, to be sensitive, to feel too much, to speak softly, to walk your own path, even if it's lonely. So when his story took a darker turn, when the headlines shifted from admiration to scandal, it didn't just feel like the fall of a celebrity, it felt personal. It felt like someone we knew had been wounded. And in a world that often loves to build people up just to tear them down, it made us ask ourselves, what do we really know about someone beyond what we see? And maybe, just maybe, it made us ask something even more important. When we fall apart, who will see us? That's why this story matters. That's why Johnny's journey resonates. Because behind all the cameras and courtrooms and chaos, he remains what he's always been, a man searching for connection, for peace, for a place to belong, just like the rest of us. But fame doesn't protect anyone from heartbreak. If anything, it magnifies it. Hey, you, the one listening, maybe watching with headphones in at midnight or quietly in your car, maybe feeling a little lost. You're not here by accident. This isn't just a celebrity story. It's your story too, in 1,000 small ways. You didn't come looking for gossip. You came looking for something real, a reason, a reminder, a whisper that says, you're not alone. Because behind the tabloid covers and red carpet glam, Johnny Depp is, at his core, just a man. A man who did what many of us have done. He loved, he trusted, he dreamed, and somewhere along the line, he broke. His story isn't just about a courtroom battle. It's about a quiet, burning question. What do you do when the person you loved becomes the one who hurt you the most? It started, like all love stories do, with magic. Johnny met Amber Heard while filming The Rum Diary. Two artists, passionate and bold, swept up in a whirlwind. He described their connection as rare, the kind of spark that feels predestined. He once said, I felt like I'd found the one. And maybe he had in that moment. For a while, it looked like the dream. The kind of relationship the world envied. They were beautiful, stylish, intensely creative. They traveled the world together, whispered inside jokes on red carpets, exchanged handwritten notes and lavish gifts. But love, when it burns too hot and too fast, often forgets to leave room for breath. Because sometimes, what feels like destiny is actually the beginning of a very long fall. What happened next wasn't just a breakup, it was a demolition. Allegations surfaced. Accusations flew. Lawsuits were filed. Suddenly, it wasn't just Johnny and Amber. It was us, the public, the fans, the critics, dissecting their lives frame by frame. Every photo became evidence. Every quote, a weapon. And as the headlines spiraled, the man we once cheered for became a cautionary tale. Imagine loving someone with your whole heart, and then watching that love be twisted into a story about your worst self. The world watched. The court judged. But the deeper wounds, they weren't on paper. They were behind closed doors, inside the silent moments, in the doubt that creeps in at 3 a.m. when you wonder, was I ever enough? Johnny went silent. For years. He didn't retaliate with angry interviews or social media rants. He stepped away, out of the spotlight. Not to hide, but to heal. You see, there comes a point in every person's life, whether you're famous or just trying to make it through, the weekend when the noise becomes too much. When the voices outside drown out the one inside that used to say, you're okay. And so, he disappeared. But healing doesn't look like what you think. It wasn't glamorous. There were no dramatic Instagram posts, no staged comebacks, just a man with a guitar, some paint, and the quiet. He leaned into his art, into the music that had always saved him, into messy canvases and long walks, into friends who didn't want explanations, into the people who knew Johnny, not the actor, but the soul underneath. Because when your world shatters, you don't need everyone. You just need a few who stay. There's a quote he once shared softly, almost as if to himself. You realize That some people love you for who they need you to be, not who you are. That hits hard, doesn't it? So many of us bend ourselves into shapes that don't fit, just to be loved. We give, we adapt, we shrink. And one day, we wake up in a life that doesn't feel like ours. The hardest part of heartbreak isn't the loneliness. It's the grief for who you were before the pain. Johnny had to learn that. We all do. That recovery isn't linear. There are no shortcuts. There are days that feel like progress and nights that feel like drowning. Healing is brutal, but it's also beautiful because it reminds you who you are. Psychologist Dr. Jenny Martinez once said, "Trauma doesn't care about fame. It doesn't care about wealth. Pain is the great equalizer. Healing is the common ground." And she's right. In his most fragile moments, Johnny didn't turn to the spotlight. He turned to stillness, to creation. He painted portraits of those he admired, from Bob Dylan to Heath Ledger, not just to honor them, but to speak the emotions he couldn't say aloud. Every brushstroke, a conversation with his own heart. He began performing music again, not in stadiums, but in smoky backroom lounges. The kind of places where nobody cared about lawsuits, only lyrics. Music became the bridge back to himself. And here's the thing, you don't need to be famous to do the same. Maybe for you, healing looks like writing in a journal no one else reads, or planting tomatoes in your backyard. Maybe it's adopting a dog, starting therapy, ending a toxic friendship, saying no, saying yes. It doesn't matter how small it looks to others. If it brings you home to yourself, it's sacred. One fan, after attending one of Depp's music sets post-trial, said, "Something that stayed with me. He looked lighter, not healed, but healing. That's the goal, isn't it? Not perfection. Just progress." If you're in the thick of your own storm, I want you to know, this isn't the end of your story. It's a chapter. A necessary one. The kind where you lose things, yes. But also the kind where you discover parts of yourself you didn't know you had. Maybe the lesson isn't that love hurts. Maybe the lesson is that love, real love, begins with you. So many of us are taught to pour out until we're empty. But Johnny's journey reminds us, don't wait until it all falls apart to remember your own worth. Start today. Start small. There's a journal linked in the description below. It's not fancy, but it's honest. A place to write the things you're afraid to say. Because the first step to healing is telling the truth, at least to yourself. And now let me ask you something real. What's one lesson about love, or heartbreak, that changed you forever? Drop it in the comments. Your words might be someone else's first breath of hope. And if Johnny Depp's journey touched something in you, don't stop here. Watch our next video. Keanu Reeves, the sad truth behind his kind smile. Because sometimes it's the ones who smile the most, who've survived the darkest nights. We've got more stories that matter, more truth, more light. If you believe love is worth fighting for, even if that fight is to love yourself again, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Ring the bell so you never miss the reminders your heart needs. And carry this with you. You are not your pain. You are your perseverance. You are not what they did to you. You are what you choose next. Stay kind, stay strong, and stay curious, because your healing, it's already begun.